All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? I don't know about you, man, but recently I've been living in my house, been feeling a little malicious, nefarious, maybe even a little evil. Have you been getting that feeling, Brian?
Well, I would say that well, first of all, like you, Taylor, I've been indoors a lot. I would say I've been in my place of, my home, the place where I reside. I would say, yeah, I'm feeling a little spunky. Feeling a little evil, really.
So, Brian, you're saying that you're and I residents are evil?
I'm feeling like an evil resident, Taylor.
Oh, shit. Well, you know what? It's been making me feel very itchy and tasty recently as well. It's been very weird. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's fucking fucked up.
I keep thinking about really craving a Brian sandwich. I don't know what that means, but the phrase just keeps popping into my head. Boy, I'd like a Brian sandwich because I'm so evil in my place of residence.
No, absolutely. And you know what? Speaking of people who want to be eaten, be made into sandwiches, and feel a little evil, this week I want to talk about the 90s Resident Evil games. We're going to talk about the classic original PS1 trilogy of Resident Evil games, Brian. Something I know you and I both know literally nothing about. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, that was well after my time. As far as survival horror, played Five Nights at Freddy's, played Among Us.
What was the one that PewDiePie loved?
I know what you're talking about because it's the one where he has his character take a pig body and he says like, "I'm R-ing the pig." That's it, right? It was Amnesia.
Amnesia, yep, that was it. Absolutely. And something Retsu Prey loved were the 90s Resident Evil games. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we get into it, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week.
Generational Moment of the Week.
Woo! Yeah! And Brian, you know exactly what the fuck I'm gonna bring up because this is maybe the most consequential thing that's happened to our show since we started doing it, outside of maybe October 7th. This is fucking shocking. And you know exactly what the fuck I'm gonna bring up. And we're both horrified by it, to be very clear. It's awful.
And to be clear, normally we try not to talk about, we have the option to talk about more serious things in the cringe generational segment, and we opt not to because sometimes something is disturbing or it's unfortunate or it's upsetting, but it's not really cringe. This specific event is both horrifying and serious and pertinent news that we don't typically, spend a lot of time talking about, but it's incredibly cringe.
It is incredibly cringe. And to the audience that don't know or have been living under a rock for the last fucking 3 or 4 days as of recording this, I believe it was literally about 2 days ago as of recording.
2 days ago.
President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela was kidnapped out of his home by a U.S.-led invasion force in his residence in Caracas, Venezuela. A operation that lasted 90 minutes, killed about 80 people, and kidnapped both him and his wife in something that is not obviously unprecedented in American history, but it is absolutely fucking unconscionable. A thing that, honestly, I was not shocked that something like this was going to happen in the Trump 2 administration.
I was shocked by the nature of it.
Absolutely shocked by the nature of it and how brazen and how unjustified this is.
And how stupid.
How stupid
I don't mean stupid because...
This is honestly, I'm not exaggerating, this might be the most unjustified, unconscionable, and hastily done foreign policy decision in my lifetime. That's literally how bad this is.
This is massive. And here's the thing, Taylor, you alluded to it. The U.S. doing an undemocratic coup against a democratically elected leader in a nation that they have an economic conflict and economic interests in, ideological conflicts in, that is not at all unprecedented. Here's the thing. Typically, at least ostensibly, the U.S. is kind of covert about that. So like when we depose someone like Allende, we don't swoop in with our guys and kidnap him in his house. When we deposed Gaddafi, we didn't swoop in and have our own people sodomize him with a bayonet, which, by the way, literally happened. We find reactionary, or if you don't like that word, dissident groups, forces within the country, typically, who we influence and who we, supply information to, and, in some cases, weapons to. We don't directly usually do it. What I'm starting to think happened is Trump became aware, or maybe has been aware for decades, because he's like a rich guy. He's in those social circles. He's like, well, yeah, of course the president can depose any world leader he wants, and he just thought that's how you do it.
Something kind of like a fucking 80s action movie. Something that's just so dumb guy like, hey, let's just fucking do this. Who cares about justifications? Like, it's crazy.
Maduro's been resistant to negotiations. Not resistant to them. He has nothing to negotiate for. Fishing boats are getting blown up in his fucking country. And pretty openly, and it's been this way since 1999, since the time of Chavez, like, we want our companies to get in there and get their oil supply. He doesn't have that much to negotiate for. Finally, the day before his kidnapping, and it was an extrajudicial kidnapping, Maduro made a public statement. He said, hey, I am open to talking with Donald Trump. I'm open to even negotiating oil markets with U.S. companies, which he shouldn't have to do, right?
It's their oil. It's their country.
It's theirs. It's literally theirs.
But that's why it's so brazen, right? Like, the thing is that in other, coups, other fucking, just like you said, like extrajudicial things, right? There was always some sort of humanitarian or whatever fucking justification America always fucking lied about, right? Yeah, but the crazy thing about this is that it was so brazen from the beginning. Literally the second he was kidnapped, Trump said, we are going to run Venezuela and we are going to make sure we get their oil. There was no like, oh, this is for humanitarian reasons, we're protecting some sort of dissident group. It was nothing like that. It was literally just pure economic, just cynical colonialism. And that's how this thing has been framed from the people doing it. That's crazy. Like, and obviously I'm glad that they're at least being fucking honest about it, but it's just crazy that we've gotten to the point where there's literally no justification for this at all anymore, outside of the obviously extremely flimsy drug cartel bullshit, which, by the way, once again, I think we might have alluded to this. Venezuela doesn't traffic drugs. That's not a Venezuela thing. That's a Colombia thing. That's a Mexico thing.
Yeah,
that's not a Venezuela thing.
Also, let's just think about this for a second. If U.S. Defense Forces, if narco officers knew that there were Venezuelan boats that were trafficking in drugs, that were trafficking in fentanyl, would they blow them up and kill other people on them? No, they'd pull them down. They'd commandeer them. They'd have 20 boats full of evidence that they've now destroyed. That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. I mean, say what you want about the DEA, but they love collecting evidence and bragging about whatever fucking shit they have. The DEA doesn't just blow shit up just for the fucking fun of it. They actually do investigate. Obviously, a lot of that's bullshit and a lot of that's fucking CIA bullshit too, but like, they at least investigate. They just don't blow shit up. That's not what the DEA does.
And they wouldn't do that because, to be honest, like, and I'm gonna sound like I'm veering towards some like liberal like decorum. Trump doesn't appreciate decorum, but like the thing with groups like the DEA is, right, they do kind of like, they're immoral, they're an evil organization, they're a criminal organization, the DEA. I truly believe that, but they want to get the job done, right?
No, absolutely. They want to brag to their other
job done.
Yeah, no, they want to brag to their other fucking, fed piggy friends about whatever drug bust they got or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? That's what they want to do. They love bragging and being braggadocious about all the fucking civil rights they trample on.
Getting their pictures taken with a mountain of coke or something.
No, exactly. They want to brag. They don't want to just blow shit up once again. Like, that's why this whole thing is just so nakedly bullshit. It obviously is just about stealing oil. And of course, this is a very new story as of recording. When this episode comes out, it'll be like at the end of this month, so who the fuck knows? Honestly, at this point, it would be really fucking funny if like a liberal sicko judge, because he's being held in the same jail that fucking Luigi's in at the moment, which is just crazy. And also the one Diddy was in, even crazier, right? I bet you those guys had nothing to talk about when they were at the chow hall together. Holy shit.
But playing poker together.
Well, that's the thing is those three non-white guys hanging out in jail.
They're gonna give Maduro the clean fade like they gave Luigi.
Oh, we gotta talk about those pictures. Honestly, Maduro is just aura farming all over these fucking fat loser federal agents. Holy shit. Every picture, he's like 7'2", and he's just like smiling and giving peace signs and shit. It's awesome.
Yeah, he does give, and I think we may have talked about this privately, Taylor, when Maduro was dancing and singing, like, imagine, he does give the most, like, cool, kind of vaguely cringe boomer guy. Like, that's like your grandpa, who you love very much.
Well, and that's the thing, though, too, is that, like, and of course the reason that Trump did this was because, Trump is definitely not a logistics guy. Say what the fuck you want about him. He's never been a fucking logistics guy.
He thought that
kidnapping... No, exactly. He thought that kidnapping Maduro and his wife would just lead to the collapse of the country because just like all American fucking intelligence have said, oh, the Venezuelan opposition are super fucking strong. They actually won the last election. They won like 97% of the vote. And that's the thing is that it's, it's once again, like the whole thing. And once again, this is still very news recordings. Things might completely fucking change.
Yeah.
But like all this did was just embolden the Venezuelan people to fucking fight back and come together. Like the fact that you're not seeing a mass exodus of people going to the Colombian border or Brazilian border and you're seeing people like just stand up and fight and protest shows that Maduro and the PSUV are a popular force. They're a popular contingency.
I was thinking about this a lot yesterday, and I'm going to tell you one of the things. So we always say this isn't really a political podcast. Like, I mean, me and Taylor both have an interest in politics, and clearly we have political beliefs, and that comes across here. I pretty much since like, I don't know, middle school or whatever, I've read a lot about Venezuela, and like, I have complicated feelings about that country, and of course I don't live there, but like Hugo Chavez, just as a personality, was kind of a formative person for me because he showed a type of politics that I don't think I'd ever been exposed to before, kind of in the mid-2000s. Remember when he was on TV a lot? The thing is, Maduro's weakness with people, the thing that he's never had that Chavez has that inspires that fierce loyalty is that Chavez did make himself like a symbol of anti-imperialism and like decolonialism. And that's how people saw him. And Maduro was never really able to have that with people. I think even people that were maybe still loyal to, kind of the pink tide goals, the United Socialist Party, it doesn't seem like Maduro had the same type of relationship with people. But since this started, since especially the bombing of the boats and maybe more now, it does seem like, at least from like what I'm seeing just from like kind of like on the ground reports and things, you do seem to be seeing more of that now. It seems like the US has kind of inadvertently made Maduro a Chavez type, which he was never quite able to be before.
No, exactly. And on top of it too, his vice president is even more of a hardliner and somebody who probably has more of that Chavez-like backing than even he did. So all it did was once again just embolden Venezuela to fight back even more, to be honest with you. And that's the thing, of course, once again, Trump is not a logistics guy. Even if he tries sending, boots into the ground in Venezuela, those American soldiers are going to get fucking slaughtered in the streets of Caracas. They'll have no allies. That's the thing. If they put boots on the ground, there will be so many caskets being sent back here, straight up.
No allies. It is like an unfamiliar terrain for like U.S. officers and commanders too. Like, it's not the type of, we've been fighting in deserts for the last 20, 25 years. And Venezuela, geographically, is pretty different.
No, exactly. It'd be like going back to Vietnam all over again. Like, that's literally what the fuck would happen. Yeah. And, also on top of it, too, like, it does say a lot that, as we talked about, Trump's not a logistics guy. He's just a vibes guy. That's why they didn't have any successors. They didn't get that fucking Nobel Peace Prize lady who looks like a fucking
Machado.
Goblin. They didn't get Guaido either. Guaido's just chilling out in fucking Miami right now. They didn't get anybody. They have nobody. They didn't even get the guy who allegedly won the last election who's living in Madrid right now. They have nobody. They have fucking nobody to replace
I don't know what they
Maduro.
thought was going to happen. Yeah, they have a vice president ready. She was sworn in as soon as it was confirmed that he'd been kidnapped. Like, what did they think was going to happen?
Yeah, exactly. A woman whose dad was literally tortured to death by the Venezuelan opposition when she was like a young woman. Like, that is who they replaced Maduro with. Maduro who, say what you want about Venezuela. We are not going to denounce anything. We have 100% critical support for Venezuela at the least. We will not say anything negative about Venezuela at the moment. But I will say, right, like, thing about Maduro is you're right. He was a buffoon type character. He was somebody who's seen as like a lovable fucking dork at most. Like, nobody honestly thought of him in Venezuela as that scary or confrontational. I mean, somebody who, once again, we're not going to say anything negative about the current administration or past administration, whatever, right? But like somebody who didn't have that like Chavez level of just ironclad support because he's a fucking dork. He was a dweeb. Yeah. He was somebody who
he's a bus driver, which by the way is one of the coolest things about him. I'm not saying that.
Oh no, absolutely. But I mean, he was just granted the presidency because he was the, vice president, whatever the fuck, when Chavez died. Like, that's the
seniority.
Thing. Like,
he was vice president. He was,
Exactly. And like, talk about Hugo Chavez once again. He survived a very similar circumstance as what's happening right now. He was kidnapped in 2002 and was ousted from his presidency for 72 hours before his people brought him back. Like, literally brought him back to being
file
kidnapped.
Of the military. This is what one of the coolest like coup reversal stories I can think of is Chavez, who again, like, not going to get into how first of all, you're going to hear enough bad things about Maduro and Chavez in the days and weeks to come anyways that you don't need to hear whatever from us. But so Chavez, held captive for 72 hours, about to be killed basically. The rank and file of the military turn on the officers leading the coup and rescue Chavez and reinstate him as president.
Yeah, genuinely crazy. It is like fucking Napoleon coming back from Corsica or whatever island he was on, level of like, holy shit.
And of course, after that, the Chavez, the regime or the administration, I hate that word, regime, does become like, more authoritarian after that.
I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, how do you have free and fair elections after something like that? Venezuela had, as it comes to quote-unquote authoritarian dictatorships, it had probably the most democratic of those quote-unquote authoritarian dictatorships. Like, say what you want, but Venezuelan democracy is certainly more free and fair than most American allies' elections. Yeah. Let's be real here.
So one of the funniest things, too, getting back to our favorite Nobel Prize winner, Ms. Machado, is that she made a statement today, unprompted. She wasn't like she's not, as far as I've seen, talking with Trump or anyone in the Trump administration. She made a statement to the press where she said, if Trump liberates Venezuela, we're going to be great allies to the United States. And it's like, nobody asked you.
Nobody fucking asked you. Go hang out with fucking Guaido in Miami, you bitch. Like, seriously.
Go hang out with Obama and to talk about your Nobel Prizes.
But yes, we will definitely be monitoring this situation in future episodes. Obviously, we're not going to delve into it every single episode for the Cringe Generational segment, but we definitely had to talk about this. But Brian, speaking of demons, monsters, and things that are actually quite political, let's get into the, once again, 90s Resident Evil games. Now, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. 2 Resident Evil games are literally my top 2 favorite video games of all time. I love them. I played them basically all at this point. I'm very excited for the next Resident Evil game that's coming out in like a month or 2 from now. Who the fuck? I think it's coming out next month, but who knows with patches and everything, it might get delayed. But I want to know, what are your like memories of Resident Evil, like growing up or now?
I played 2 when it was relatively new. My older brother had it. We played that a lot. He taught me how to play it. He showed it to me. I played it quite a bit. Scared the shit out of me. When Nemesis came out, that's Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, rather. I got it for my brother that year, like when it was new for his birthday. And again, we played that together a lot. I had to play it with my brother because it scared me. So I could only play it when my brother was around, so I didn't feel scared. And that the thing is, I liked it a lot. I always liked horror. I thought it was really scary. It was, at the time, unlike any game I'd ever played. The locked-in cameras, the quiet pacing, the mystery, exploratory element, the kind of impending sense of dread. I hadn't really played a video game like that before. I think we had Code Veronica, but I don't remember ever playing it. I played 4, 2 and 4 are probably the ones I played the most. I played the crap out of 4, and then I kind of tuned out. I don't think I needed it anymore after that. I loved 2, I love Nemesis, and I love Resident Evil 4.
No, absolutely, yeah. I would say I first played my first Resident Evil game. I want to say Resident Evil 4 was my first. I could be wrong, but I'm like 90% sure it was. I remember playing that game probably 2006, so it would have been like 12 or 13, and I've been in love with the series ever since.
Well, when that game came out too, it was like a revelation. That's not what we're talking about today, but just kind of for some context, that game did like shift kind of the whole series and kind of the whole landscape of like adventure video games for a while.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is one of those games that literally created like the template for third-person shooting games for like a decade plus. Like, it is a revolutionary game. But, speaking of revolutionary, Resident Evil 1, right? So that's the one you didn't have much experience playing personally, right?
No.
You said?
Nope.
So Resident Evil 1 came out in 1995. It was, of course, made by my favorite game company ever, Capcom. Awesome. Make great fucking fighting games, make great adventure games, make fucking great horror games very clearly. I did not play the first Resident Evil, the PS1 version. I've never played that version, actually. I, however, did play the DS port of the original Resident Evil. Are you familiar with Resident Evil Deadly Silence, Brian?
I've observed people online since it came out talking about it, similar to like with the first Resident Evil game. I've never experienced it firsthand, no.
It's crazy. So it is, I would say, a pretty straightforward port of Resident Evil with a lot of like quality of life improvements that the DS had. Like, for example, there's certain puzzles that you do in the main game, but you incorporate DS stuff into it. Like, there's a part where you can blow out candles by blowing into your DS. Like, it's fascinating. They incorporated so much shit. There's like extra puzzles in there. There's also an extra like mini game where you can like stab enemies with a knife when you enter in certain rooms. It's very, very good. Like, if you're playing the original Resident Evil, that is the way to play the original Resident Evil, like straight up. It is by far the best way to do it. Now, I have way more experience with playing the Resident Evil remake, which is not a game we're necessarily going to cover because, of course, we're covering the 90s Resident Evil games. But that is like my second favorite game ever. I love the Resident Evil remake. It takes everything that was good about the original and makes it even better and adds more shit. But the original Resident Evil, the reason I love that game so much, and I know the reason that people still talk about it to this day, is the fucking dog shit voice acting and how cringe.
The insane voice acting.
It is insane. And, I've watched a lot of interviews, a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So there's very interesting elements of why the dialogue is so just campy and bad in that game. So number one, it was made by Japanese people who didn't use any kind of localization or really any translators. They basically just took what was in Japanese without localizing it. So that's why it sounds so awkward. The literal translations of Japanese and put it into English. And then also they had the voice actors, I believe, were primarily non-native English speakers who knew English, who once again were translating this from Japanese to English, basically. So that's why it's so stilted and it's so bad, but it's awesome.
If you're a millennial, if you're on kind of Web 1.0 or even like Web 2.0 times, if you're our age, these are like classic early internet clips. These were, like I said, I've said many times, I came up, my internet coming of age was on the Something Awful forums, and these were like go-to clips to post when you wanted to make fun of someone.
No, absolutely. And, it's one of those things where a lot of games later on in the style of Resident Evil, the Resident Evil clones, tried doing that dialogue, but it came off even more stilted and cynical because they were clearly just trying to rip off Resident Evil. But at the same time, there's a certain amount of charm to that too. But the story behind the original Resident Evil, called Resident Evil because it takes place in a mansion, an evil mansion with zombies and monsters.
That's always bothered me. When you're a kid, you don't think about it. But as I got older, I was like, Resident Evil? What the hell does that mean?
So here's the thing, right? There's another bit of trivia in regards to the title, because in Japan it's called Biohazard. The reason they couldn't do it is because the band Biohazard owned the copyright, so they couldn't do it. But the story of Resident Evil, so once again, it takes place in an evil mansion. You can pick one of two characters, either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, and you just go through various rooms, find keys, solve puzzles, and you have to kill zombies and other monsters. And of course, it's one of those things where you just go from location to location, surviving the horror, if you will. And eventually you learn that the person who organized, or who's the organization of your like paramilitary group, not paramilitary, special operations group, is the one who is orchestrating this whole thing to get battle data, because he's actually a scientist with the evil Umbrella Corporation that also runs the town that the police force of the special operations is going on. And that's the thing, is that this is like kind of anti-capitalist media, if you think about it, because it shows an evil corporation controlling a town and all the bad shit that goes, all the deregulation problems that come along with that.
Well, and we've talked about this in the past, at least between ourselves. I don't know if they're formally on the show. A lot of the media you consume is going to have anti-capitalist undercurrents. Now, I'm not trying to do the online thing of being like, this is actually a socialist movie or this is super class conscious, but that's going to be the default of anything that you consume in that millennial period, in the sort of the end of history, the early 2000s, Y2K era, because that's the first time in our lives when we're just surrounded by it, right? Where it hadn't probably quite sunk in yet, but the failures of all that are everywhere. So even in something like Resident Evil, which I am sure no one was thinking this is going to be a movie about. I mean, I do think there's a degree of like conscious, like, environmentalist angles to it. But, and especially I would say in 2 and 3, kind of the anti-corporatist elements, they become a pretty big part of the storyline. And part of that is probably unintentional. Probably it's just world building stuff, but it is pretty interesting because I don't know that you would see that in many of the horror games that came after.
No, not really. Especially, some of the more notable franchises like Silent Hill is pretty apolitical. Like there's pretty much nothing in the Silent Hill games that you could be like,
yeah, Silent Hill has its own philosophical type thing. Like I do think there's some stuff going on in Silent Hill, but it's not politics. It's more like metaphysics or whatever,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like nobody could fucking play Silent Hill 2 and be like, this is a commentary on fucking abortion or whatever. Like,
I bet someone has.
Oh, well, that's the thing though, Brian. Somebody did do that about Silent Hill 4 and circumcision.
I make fun of the anti-circumcision guys, but also circumcision's fucked. That's a complicated thing because it's funny to make fun of them, but they're basically right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I will never disagree with them on that. But either way, so the ending of Resident Evil, so you get to the lab, which is, of course, the end location of almost every Resident Evil game. You get to the fucking lab. And you get to see the ultimate bioweapon, Tyrant, which is funny, the fact that it's like an ultimate bioweapon, because its weak spot is immediately exposed. It's a beating heart, so that's hilarious. Like, real ultimate bioweapon with its weak point literally pulsating in front of you, but, hey, whatever the fuck.
As someone who, and the thing is, I know my brother had, like, we had the Resident Evil games. He got 2. I got him 3 as a present because he liked 2 so much. And I know he had 1. I never played it, and I don't remember him really playing it. He might not have liked it, especially because if you play 2 and 3 first, and then you go back, it seems like you might not like this. My understanding, just from, like, video game discourse about Resident Evil, is it seems to me kind of like it was, because it was a pretty radical game. At least in the States, I don't think there were, survival horror was not a genre, and certainly the way that it functions in Resident Evil, there's a pretty big risk. To me, the first Resident Evil game almost seems like a proof of concept when you compare it to the sequels.
Yes, absolutely. And also on top of it too, it is, as you can imagine, it's by far the shortest Resident Evil game. Like, if you know the solutions to the puzzles, you can beat it in like well under an hour. It is a very, very short game. And it's one of those things where it was another one of those games that, and this is just how gaming was in the 90s, to all of our Gen Z babies who don't know, where basically every game at this point outside of like From Software games basically give you everything in regards to accessibility, which, to be fair, I'm actually a huge fan of. No, I'm actually a huge fan of. I legitimately do like that. I mean, I don't think that all games should have that automatically, but I do like the fact that I do like that it's an option 100%. Yes. I think having more accessible game design is fantastic. However, how things were in the 90s, games were made extremely artificially difficult because they were short. And the video game market in America, not so much Japan, but in America, was focused on the rental market. That's how gaming companies mostly made their money back then. So that's why if you play a game, especially from the NES or Super NES, you're gonna die 5,000 fucking times. But if you beat it with unlimited lives or mods or save states, you could beat the game in like fucking 30 minutes. Like, it's crazy how short those games were.
And I know that to Zoomers, and probably to some of the youngest millennials, that's gonna sound across the board like bullshit. I have to say, there's levels to it, right? Because all games were designed that way. Virtually all video games, from the Nintendo Entertainment System through to like the PS2, the Xbox, that was a large part of how gameplay was designed, was kind of trial and error, exploration, or you're dying all over and over again. If you're playing a lot of platformers, which I was, there's a lot of, every level is a platformer, but it's also kind of a puzzle, and you have to die to see how it works. And there's levels of creativity to it, right? So there's a game like maybe Super Mario Brothers 2 or Mega Man, or like, I don't know, to go with like, a
Castlevania,
slightly later game, Castlevania, where it's pretty cheap, but it's also pretty inventive. So it's pretty satisfying to do that trial and error discovery. There's also games like Castlevania 64, which is artificially difficult for its own sake. I'm assuming Resident Evil is the same thing. It's made to be not just hard, but unchallenging, right? It's kind of just made to fuck you around and waste your time. There's no satisfaction in it, but not all games are like that. Like, there is a way to do the artificial difficulty that's like still fun to a degree.
Yes, and I would say Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil, the American release, I would say is the second hardest Resident Evil game. Code Veronica is undeniably the hardest Resident Evil game. There's really no debate on that. It's one of the few Resident Evil games that doesn't have any difficulty settings. It's the only one that has one difficulty setting, and a game that soft locks you inarguably more than any other Resident Evil game. There's so many points in that game that soft lock you. It's so bad. But in the original Resident Evil, the American release was different from the Japanese release because the Japanese release was significantly easier, and on top of it, it had auto aim, whereas the original PS1 Resident Evil game is the only Resident Evil game that does not have any auto aim, which for a fixed camera game is fucking nuts. That's crazy. Yeah. Like, that is a handicap that was only made specifically to once again cater to the video game rental market, which we're not big fans of, to be very clear. Like, we obviously love the rental market, but the idea of handicapping games to basically rip off gamers, not a big fan of that. We don't like that. We've never liked that.
To kind of get it out of the way. So soft locking, do games still soft lock? Is that a thing Zoomers have to deal with?
Not so much, no. I have played games where, especially in the modern age, games have been really kind of, when it comes to completion, been focusing on like the speed running community and stuff like that. And there's certainly some things that you can do to soft lock, especially, we're talking about recent Resident Evil games. For example, the Resident Evil 4 remake, right? Like, to get the like maximum rank on one of the difficulty settings, you can only save a handful of times. And if you save too many times or save in an awkward spot, you're basically fucked. But for the most part, I would say in a lot of modern games, and to be fair, I probably play, literally a handful of new games, like new games every year, especially when they're on like discount. And I can't tell you the last time I actually got soft locked out of a new game. I think that's a thing that game designers have pretty much fully fixed at this point, although it is still a thing that could theoretically exist.
So the thing with soft locking, my impression of it back in the day, and I am inclined to think I'm right about this, is that usually it happens more from developer oversight than from malice, which is a thing you'll see with a lot of games from that era when they have fucked up things that happen, is they're kind of just stupid cracks you can slip in that either make it impossible to progress or unrealistically difficult. And a lot of times I think that would happen because video games were fairly old by the time the Resident Evil series was beginning, but still kind of being worked out. I'd say with Resident Evil in particular, that set camera style, that exploratory style, still pretty new. Probably a lot of, tweaking, a lot of refinements that developers were still working on pretty much all the way through to the finish line with that game, I would assume.
Yes, you're correct. I would agree with you, especially on the soft locking issue. Like, I would personally say it was pretty much always a game design oversight. I don't think any game designer purposefully made a game like that. But at the same time, it was a thing that definitely happened in older games. And just real quick, I want to get to the end of the story of Resident Evil. So once again, you could play as either Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield. You get multiple endings. It's one of the only Resident Evil games that has multiple endings. I think it might be the only major Resident Evil game that has multiple endings, although I could be wrong about that. I have to go back and put my noggin to that. Actually, Resident Evil 7 has 2 endings, but they're both basically the same. But either way, the Resident Evil original ending, there's multiple different endings depending on who you save and depending on what different, paths you take. And also, the ending can determine on whether or not you actually face the final version of Tyrant or not, the ultimate bad guy, the ultimate bioweapon I was mentioning earlier. But either way, the end of the game is you always escape, no matter what. But it just depends on who you escape with, and it depends on whether you blow up the mansion or not. That is ultimately the ending. Now, the thing about the ending that's interesting too, right, is that the intro of Resident Evil, which is also very infamous, but I would say it's actually genuinely pretty terrifying, the intro to Resident Evil, whereas the dialogue is just bad. Because, like, the thing that's really terrifying about the intro to the first Resident Evil game is that it's actually shot like a horror movie with live action. Have you seen the intro to the first Resident Evil game, Brian, with, like, live action?
You showed it to me. Actually, you showed it to me a long time ago.
Yeah, it's so fucking good. And even the American version, which is the censored version, in fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's never been an American release with the fully uncensored Japanese opening. But either way, it's still terrifying, even with the obfuscation of like the gore and everything. Like, it's one of those things, like if you showed that to like a kid watching a horror movie in like the 90s, they probably would have been like genuinely terrified by it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it's
it
just
looks like a legit horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. And the outro is also the only other thing in the game that actually has live action, but it's just basically like reactions of those like very novice actors who I believe some of them weren't even adults, if I'm not mistaken. I believe the actor who played Jill was 16, which is weird. Like,
so they probably
I
got paid fuck all.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe all of the live action actors except for Jill have been found at this point, because I actually remember watching an interview with all of them except for Jill, and all the like live action actors they could to fucking talk about it, which is something that nobody else has ever done, by the way. They even got them able to like make a fan film, which was really fucking cool. Something that was funded on Patreon, I think.
Actually,
cool shit.
A good old friend of mine, my friend Murray, who grew up in the same area I did, and me and him have got back in touch lately, told me to ask you about that for this episode, if you had seen Resident Evil fan films.
I have not seen that specific fan film. I've seen the trailer of it. I've seen some other like Resident Evil stuff over the years, you know, because I was a fucking nerd and I was obsessed with this stuff, like even more so than I am now. But I've not seen that specific fan film, I'll be fully honest. But I did see the trailer. And it looked very, very adorable. So, but yes, so that is, I think, all the discussion I'm going to have on the first Resident Evil game. It's a game that launched an entire franchise. To this date, Brian, fun fact, it is still the highest grossing, best-selling live action video game technically ever made, even though it has very little live action in it. It's just the intro and the outro, but still it's the highest grossing live action video game, FMV video game ever, so there's something to be said for that.
Which I guess, you know, what would the competitors be in that case, you know, like...
Yeah, like fucking Night Trap or Phantasmagoria or whatever. Like games
Phantasmagoria,
games that were infamous but didn't really sell that well, you know what I mean, because they were legally hamstrung. But that leads next into our next game, which many people still to this day call the best Resident Evil game. I personally don't agree with that, but I still think it's a fucking fantastic game. Of course, talking about Resident Evil 2.
So for me, and part of this is because it's the first one I played, it's the one I played most of as a kid. I gotta say, I think this is arguably for me the definitive survival horror game. I think even years later, when you're looking at what survival horror games were trying to do, the feelings they were trying to elicit, the only game that I think might have done it better was Silent Hill 2.
Yes, I can definitely get that viewpoint. And this is also the game that, even though of course the first Resident Evil game was very financially successful, was obviously extremely influential, but Resident Evil 2 was really the game that most people, if they played a Resident Evil game, probably started off with. I would say pretty definitively. Like, it is the game that I would say probably had the most fans early on. Because like the first Resident Evil game wasn't really, like, it was a popular game, but it wasn't ported that much. Like, it had a Saturn version, it had a PC version, a PS1 version, and then of course the DS version, you know, fucking a decade plus later. But Resident Evil 2 was ported to many more consoles. It was of course originally a PS1 game. It was ported to the N64. Maybe the most like genuinely impressive port ever. Because like the thing about the original N64 is it couldn't actually display like FMV cutscenes or CG cutscenes, but they somehow were able to do that somehow and also add more content than the PS1 version. Genuinely crazy.
Yeah, I had both PS1 edition and the N64 one, and I gotta say, my recollection is that the PS1 game played better. I always got the feeling that it's like, oh, this was developed more with this in mind rather than the N64. It
absolutely was.
But I was always shocked, even as a kid, by how good the N64 port looked, because so in general I prefer the N64 to the PlayStation, but hands down the N64 was not able to process graphics in general the way the PS was. So what I remember with this game that I think is a good jumping off point, and this is kind of what defines classic Resident Evil for me, is that when you put this game on, you know it's about zombies, you know that you play a cop or a detective or something with a gun, you know that there's like a zombie siege, you're expecting this mayhem and this blood and this gore, and you don't get that, right? And this is going to sound hokey in 2026 to say this, but you get silence, you get empty streets, and your character in game, the most noise you get typically is the sound of their feet clacking as they walk down the street from empty room to empty room. You're surrounded by these barren, huge, scary buildings, and you have to choose which one to go into. And you find little scraps of paper, you find little clues, little tools along the way, and there's something about that when you played that as a kid, and I think I was probably 8 when my brother got this game, maybe even 7, but somewhere around there. Very unsettling. Not just that it's the slow burn, but that at this time, this was probably the most like gory game that I'd ever played. And I know it's coming. You know it's coming as you venture through the early stages of this game, but it just leaves you hanging there. At the time, pretty revolutionary, especially when most video game developers are trying to really push this sort of still very Gen X-y, we're being edgy and exciting and in your face and really trying to grab kids' attention. For a game to do that kind of slow burn thing, it felt very innovative at the time.
No, absolutely. And even though this is not my favorite Resident Evil game or even my favorite like 90s Resident Evil game, I will say it probably has the best overall gameplay of any of the 90s Resident Evil games. It feels the most like just structurally sound of a Resident Evil game. Like all the controls feel like how a classic Resident Evil game should be. The graphics look like a Resident Evil game should be. In this game, you also get 2 characters like you did in the first game. You get Leon S. Kennedy, otherwise known as Leon Sexy Kennedy, and you get Claire Redfield, the sister of Chris Redfield from the first game. And the story is, and this is so funny in retrospect, right? This is how campy it is. Like, Leon Kennedy is a rookie cop. It's his first day on the force. He drives into this desolate city. By the way, a desolate city that, like, is supposed to be barricaded, but he's just able to drive through to this fucking city. It's hilarious. Yeah. That nobody knows anything about, which, you know, once again, I know the 90s were different. I mean, the fact that we have so little 9/11 footage should tell you how things are so much different now than they were, you know, nowadays versus how they were, right? But, like, it's once again, like, nobody was aware that this town that is, like, the population of, like, anywhere between Madison and Green Bay is just being fucking bombarded by zombies. A major pharmaceutical city is just, like, completely blocked off. Like, nobody knows about this, and people are just able to drive in and out. Like, what the fuck?
But pre-internet, you know. Yeah, this is, for my recollection, and again, this is the game I started on, this is the beginning of survival horror to me as a distinct genre. There probably are predecessors in this kind of mold, especially probably Japanese games, but like there are horror games before Resident Evil, but they're like monster games. They're usually kind of platformers, or they involve fighting a monster, which you do fight monsters in this, but it's a little different. Like, survival is the operative term in the phrase survival horror game, not horror. So it's not just that you're encountering scary things, it's that you are under duress and your goal is not to fight them and win, it's to stay alive. And I think that's one of the most effective things about these early Resident Evil games, is it's very explicit. Your goal is not necessarily to be this badass cop that blows up zombies' heads, it's to not die, because these things are inhuman. Do you get the weird creatures in RE1, or does that start here? Because I think about the liquor, which scared the shit out of me as a kid. These things that aren't really zombies, they're something else. Does that start with this game?
I would say it started with the first Resident Evil game. You of course get the Cerberuses, the dogs, and then you get the hunters, those like giant frog amphibian like fucking like demon enemies. Still maybe the most annoying like enemy in the entire Resident Evil series. I fucking hate the hunters. But I would say for the most part, I would say Resident Evil 2 is the ones that people really remember, like the liquor, for example, obviously. And on top of it too, this was the first Resident Evil game to have the thing that is now basically ubiquitous in most horror games at this point, the stalker enemy in Mr. X, which he doesn't really show up that much in this game, but he is a stalker enemy. He actually shows up way more in the Resident Evil 2 remake, where he is an annoying son of a bitch in the Resident Evil 2 remake. But in this game, he is a stalker enemy. He shows up, I think, in 4 or 5 different instances. I believe mostly in the Leon scenario, although I believe he can show up in the Claire B scenario. Although I could be wrong about that. It's been a long time since I played the original Resident Evil 2. But either way, so it's the thing is, you know, just like with the first game, you're uncovering this mass conspiracy with Umbrella. Because like I said in the first game, the entire operation was set up as a combat testing operation for Umbrella. Whereas in this game, you have to survive basically the thing that Umbrella ultimately wrought, which destroyed this fucking Midwest mid-sized town, right? And the other characters who are involved in it, like the mayor, for example, and the sheriff of the Raccoon City Police Department are intimately involved with this. Some really disturbing, like, body horror shit happens in this. There's a little girl that you have to save, and of course you get Ada in this game, aka maybe the hottest video game character ever. Love Ada. Will never get sick of her. She's so fucking hot in Resident Evil 4 remake. It's crazy, dude. And I'm not even a big, like, fucking weeb, like, anime video game character thing, but I'm like, they did a good job modeling her in Resident Evil 4. I'll just say that. Like, they did the Uncanny Valley thing of video game characters and went completely the wayside with the modern Resident Evil characters. They did a very good job. But either way, Resident Evil 2, you get to play these 2 characters, and both scenarios are different. You actually get to choose 2 different scenarios, so it's, I would say, maybe the most customizable Resident Evil game of all time, even more so than the Resident Evil 2 remake, which did this very half-assedly. But you could play the game in 4 different ways. 2 characters, 4 different ways. And in the Claire scenario, you get Sherry, who's this little girl who you have have to basically save from her parents. One of them is like a psychotic doctor, and the other is another psychotic doctor who actually got infected with the virus that's even worse than the original virus in the Resident Evil game. There's also a weird incest plot where she gets infected by her dad with a bug. Very gross. I'm not going to expound upon it even more so than that. But either way, that happens. And of course, in the Leon scenario, you get Ada, who is Leon's muse. Leon gets hit on by every woman in the world except for Ada, but he just wants Ada. He wants nobody else. He can't fuck anybody outside of Ada, and she will never let him fuck.
Leon is like a classic like yaoi anime guy, for real. Like
exactly. So, but then, yeah, you eventually avoid all the pit traps, you avoid all the monsters, and then eventually you get to the final boss in Resident Evil 2, which in the A scenario is the first, well, not the first, but the first final version of William Birkin, who is the dad of Sherry Birkin, the little girl you're trying to save, who every time you fuck him up, he just gets more and more monstrous, which is also a really cool thing. You see that in a lot of like classic horror movies and stuff. And then the final boss in the, I think, Leon scenario, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a B scenario, is Mr. X when he's all like fucking souped up once again. He's basically just an even stronger version of the first tyrant monster from the first Resident Evil game. And then once you beat both scenarios, you get the true ending where you get to fight the giant fucking amorphous blob of William G. Birkin. One of the best Resident Evil fights ever. It's so fucking good. It's so gross, so nasty. You gotta fucking shoot him a million times. And of course, just like every Resident Evil game, you finally finish off the bad guy with a rocket launcher. And then you get to escape Raccoon City in the nick of time on a fucking train, which that's a very unrealistic thing, by the way. What mid-sized city in America has a fast train?
That's train. As Midwestern excellence ourselves, we gotta call it. There is no public transportation. It is fuck all. It's bullshit in the Midwest. That is what breaks my immersion for this game.
You know, if this game took place on a Sunday, they would have had to walk on a strode outside of Raccoon City.
They'd have a 45-minute wait, yeah. So the PS1, when you were a kid and that came out, this sounds dumb. Sometimes I see N64 or PS1 games that I thought looked like the most amazing games in the world, and I think like, wow. But this looked more realistic than any video game graphics I had ever seen up to that point. What we're talking about in Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, they looked closer to real than I ever thought video games were going to get. So when you see something like these creatures, not even the zombies or the dogs, which are pretty scary, something like these amorphous blob creatures or like the lickers, you feel as a little kid like you're seeing it in live action, like it's there with you.
No, and that's the thing is that like, and even then, I think a lot of the like classic PS1 games, especially the Resident Evil games, I think still look pretty good. I mean, obviously they're nearly 30 fucking years old. If you ever want to see the best graphics this game ever had, fun fact, I have the Resident Evil 4 GameCube demo disc, and that version has a upscaled, like fucking retro upscaling of the Resident Evil 2 trailer, and it looks significantly better than the PS1 version. Like, it is crazy. It looks, it's so like retro modern. It's like retro futurist, but for fucking video games.
Sounds pretty cool.
No, it is fucking fantastic. But yeah, so the ending of Resident Evil 2, once again, they get to escape in the train just in the nick of time. Raccoon City gets blown up by nuclear weapons, and then they basically are like, we're gonna find out more about Umbrella, and it ends like a fucking cheesy action movie, and it even has like a cheesy butt rock song at the very end. I'm sure you know exactly what cheesy butt rock song I'm talking about.
Again, that was an old internet classic. It was one of our favorite kind of nerd memes. Is the soundtracks for the Resident Evil games, some great soundtrack moments throughout Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 1. There's the butt rock ending theme, and of course the cutscenes. If you are of a certain age, that was some of the funniest shit in the world to see online out of context.
Oh, absolutely. And then the last game we're going to be covering here is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This is the last 90s Resident Evil game. Not even the last 90s Resident Evil game we're going to cover, just the last 90s Resident Evil game. Believe it or not, even though Resident Evil, I would argue, was probably the most like culturally significant and influential in the 90s, there were only ever actually 3 Resident Evil games released in the 90s, because Resident Evil Gun Survivor and Code Veronica came out in 2000, which one of those games is beloved and the other one is definitely not. Take a pick. There's actually a Resident Evil Gun Survivor 2 that came out exclusively in Japan as home release and then was released, I believe, in America and Japan as an arcade game. A game I have played because it is at Galloping Ghost Arcade in Chicago, or I'm sorry, Brookfield, Illinois. And it is definitely better than the original Gun Survivor, but it is still not a great game. I'm going to be honest with you. It is a rough motherfucking game, as you can imagine. But real quick, so Resident Evil 3 is technically Resident Evil 3. It's technically the third game in the series, but it was originally designed as a side game, which is why the intro, Jill's like, I have to leave. It is my last escape. It was originally going to be called Resident Evil Last Escape, and it was going to be a side game. But Code Veronica was actually supposed to be the original Resident Evil 3. But in a bit of bullshit legalese, because Code Veronica was going to be released released exclusively on the Dreamcast, and Capcom had to deal with Sony to only release mainline games on the PS1. Resident Evil 3 became Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 3 Code Veronica became just Resident Evil Code Veronica. So that's the reason why Resident Evil 3 Code Veronica is not that. But either way, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is a quasi-paraquel, I think it's called. It takes place just a little bit before Resident Evil 2, concurrently, and just slightly after Resident Evil 2. And we're once again back to Jill Valentine. The first Resident Evil game where you just get one character. You get one character, but unlike Resident Evil 2, because of course all the Resident Evil games at this point are all coming out with their own different gameplay dynamics. The thing that I love about Resident Evil 3 is that even though you get to play as one character almost entirely throughout, you get a side character who is maybe the most soy Resident Evil character until Code Veronica. But either way, you get mostly one character, but every scenario is different due to the multiple gameplay routes you can take and the randomization, which makes Resident Evil 3 easily, the original Resident Evil 3, one of the most difficult games to speedrun in the Resident Evil community, bar none. It is basically impossible to get a world record in that game on any percent. It's crazy.
So my older brother loved Resident Evil 2. We played that together. I got him this for his birthday when it came out. And even at the time and over the years when I would revisit it, to me it felt like Resident Evil 2 is like the essence of the game. And keeping in mind, I have never played the first Resident Evil game, so like there's probably context there that I'm missing. So Resident Evil 2 is like the essence of it. And I remember even as a kid playing Resident Evil 3 and being like, oh, they took everything about Resident Evil 2, kind of the gameplay, the atmosphere, the plot, and they kind of just made it bigger. They made it feel a little more fast-paced, a little more actiony, and a little more video gamey, right? Like it still has that really cool slow burn pacing. It still has a lot of creepy atmosphere, but they definitely looked to me at the success of Resident Evil 2 and said, we need to take this skeleton of a game and add some crazy shit to it to make it more engaging.
Yes, absolutely. And Resident Evil 3 out of the 90s Resident Evil games is easily the most action Resident Evil game, which I think is a reason why a lot of people say it's the worst 90s Resident Evil game. Now, I don't.
Do they really?
I personally think, yes, which I think is insane. I personally think Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is my favorite of the 90s Resident Evil games by quite a bit. Now, once again, I will not say it is structurally the best. I would once again say Resident Evil 2 is structurally the best, but Resident Evil 3 to me is easily the most replayable. And it's also the most replayable because it has the worst remake of the Resident Evil games too, by far.
So you have to replay it.
Absolutely. The Resident Evil 3 remake is by far the worst Resident Evil remake. And there's 4 of them at this point. I would say the first one's the best. Second one's really good. I would say the second one is almost as good as the original Resident Evil 2, but it falters in the fact that the A and B scenarios aren't different really much at all in the Resident Evil 2 remake, which was a big mistake on their part, but it is still a great game. I won't deny that. And also, Mr. X is far more annoying and terrifying in the Resident Evil 2 remake than he is in the original. And the Resident Evil 4 remake is like 95% as good as Resident Evil 4. It is fantastic. But either way, Resident Evil 3 remake is by far the worst. So Resident Evil 3, the classic, is still, in my opinion, the version to play. And once again, you're playing as Jill throughout 95% of the game. And once again, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, right? We're talking about Stalker with Mr. X. Nemesis, I would say to this day, the original Nemesis is still by far the best video game Stalker ever.
When you're a little kid, he's so fucking scary.
He's so scary. He is very difficult to kill. And basically, he can go through pretty much any room. Outside of save rooms, he can go in any fucking room in the entire game. He can follow you. He's, especially early on, he's nearly indestructible. The gameplay here is, once again, it's still very much survival horror, but it's definitely more veering into the action horror of survival horror. So you can fight back, but early on, I'll just say good fucking luck. I will say
no,
good fucking luck early on.
Nemesis early on in the game, you are dead. Like, it is a fool's errand to try to confront Nemesis early in the game.
Especially on your first few playthroughs, 100%. It is almost always better to just run away and not even bother. It is.
Which I want to say too, and this is me being kind of an old head here, it's also more fun to play the game that way, because then you get the creepy atmosphere of knowing there's this monster out stalking you. Whereas, let's say that you played through a couple of times and you destroy Nemesis right away and you're able to confront him because you've become like an expert RE3 player, right? To me, that loses a lot of the excitement of the first section of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which is, at least, you know, when you play it when you're younger, it's the kind of the creepy horror movie knowledge that there's this unstoppable killing machine lurking out there and you have to avoid it. Like, I don't know why you'd want to rob yourself of that core element of the game and then get the more rewarding, you know, you progress, you learn to play the game, you get different weaponry, and then you're finally able to confront Nemesis. That to me seems so much more satisfying anyways. Can't imagine why anyone would want to play the game any other way unless you were like speedrunning it.
No, absolutely. Especially in your first few playthroughs, you should pretty much always run away from Nemesis. And another thing that the Resident Evil 3 remake totally fumbled is they really fumbled Nemesis. They fumbled him so bad. Like in the first Resident Evil 3, right, you get basically hints of what Nemesis Nemesis is. Your compatriot Brad, who's also the guy who fucking ran away from you in the first game and saved your ass at the last fucking minute as he was about to run out of fuel. Brad's the biggest pussy in the Resident Evil franchise by far. What a bitch.
He's so fucking annoying.
But either way, whatever. So Brad is basically like, there's a monster. He's going to fuck us up, basically. And you spend like the first 20, 30 minutes just being like, what the fuck is he talking about? And then you make it to the RPD station, which is, of course, what, you know, Leon and Claire got to at the very beginning of Resident Evil 2. And you're like, Brad's okay. And then immediately this monster drops in front of him, kills Brad in 4 seconds fucking flat, throws his body at you, and then just yells, stars, at you. And that's your first confrontation. It is genuinely one of the most iconic moments of any video game, let alone survival horror. Whereas in the Resident Evil 3 remake, you're in your apartment, you're in Jill's apartment, which is pretty cool seeing the inside of like main character Resident Evil games, like just living space. It's really cool to see that. And like, it's one of the few parts of that game that's actually really good about environmental storytelling because it just shows how much her like mental health has declined since the Arclay Mountain incident. It's really cool to see. But like, she picks up a phone, Brad's like, hey, you gotta watch out. And she's like, what? And then immediately Nemesis just breaks through the wall of her apartment and it's a scripted event where you have to run away. It's within literally, I'm not even kidding you, the first like 2 minutes of the video game. It's terrible.
God,
so
that's
bad.
such a bummer.
It's so bad. And on top of it too, I believe there's 3 moments where you actually fight Nemesis on the streets of Raccoon City, which by the way, the streets of Raccoon City in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis are about 4 streets in an alley, and that's it. It's so minimal. And then you kill him like, or you knock him down like 3 times, and then you never have to fight him as a stalker enemy ever again in that game. It's so fucking lame. It is pathetic. It's so half-assed. Whereas in the original game, you have to basically run away from him throughout the vast majority of the game. I believe outside of, let me think, I think except for the lab, and I think outside of maybe one other part, you're basically running away from him basically the entirety of the game. Now, there are a couple scripted elements where it's like, oh, Nemesis is going to come here, blah, blah, blah. But especially during the streets of Raccoon City, it is completely unscripted. He can chase you basically anywhere and everywhere. Like, it is one of those things where you're like, unless you're in a, once again, a save room, you're basically fucked. You can't reasonably run away from him. And on top of it, too, the other thing that's really cool about the Resident Evil 3 is that you once again have to run away from Umbrella, the ultimate, at this point, Umbrella bioweapon. Because all the Umbrella bioweapons are getting scarier and scarier. You know what I mean? It started off as Tyrant, who's kind of lame, and then it went to fucking Birkin, and it went to Mr. X, who are more terrifying, and now Nemesis, who's basically fucking indestructible. Like, it just goes from, like, one end to the other. And the thing that's really cool about it, right, is that you get even more Umbrella intrigue, because now you actually get to fight, we're talking about paramilitary, now you get the corporate paramilitary force known as the UBCS, who are led by a Russian guy, I think is Mikhail, I think? Yeah, Mikhail, yeah. And then you get some other guy named Nikolai, who is the, like, saboteur of that game. You know, spoilers to a game that's 25 fucking years old. But the saboteur of the group who's basically trying to screw everybody else in UBCS, kill everybody, and get all the, like, combat data for himself so he can sell it on the black market or back to Umbrella. And then on top of it, you get some other characters like Tyrell, who Tyrell is one of the few things who's better in the remake than in the original, but he's another great character. And then the most soy Resident Evil character until Code Veronica, we get Carlos Oliveira, who is just so cheesy. He has such a boy band hairstyle, but he's the one UBCS guy, along with maybe Tyrell, who's like, oh, this guy's actually here to save people in this paramilitary fucking corporate force. He's one of the few that hasn't been completely hollowed out by this capitalist fucking paramilitary force yet. So he is your sidekick. And he's the only other character you can play in the main game too. You play for him for like 10% of the game, I would say.
My favorite things about Nemesis, and this actually applies to 2, but I think you get it a little more fully formed here. So the Resident Evil games, when they came out, they were pretty scary. There isn't, to be honest, and maybe I'd feel differently if I replayed them now, there isn't a lot of camp like you would see in maybe later survival horror games. They are meant to be pretty scary, but there is kind of a through line in its DNA of some kind of 50s atomic horror stuff. Of course, the Umbrella Corporation, the biohazard element. But what you see in Resident Evil 3, that is one of my favorite set pieces in any horror game, is there's a period of the game where you go into a building, you notice that there's spiders everywhere, right? For a few of them, there's just like normal kind of little spiders everywhere. And then suddenly you get to the upper floor of this building and there's these giant, like human-sized spiders. Now, I was a little kid when I saw this, and I love creatures, been like a monster kid since I was probably like 6. And I remember being so excited by that as a kid, being so excited by the gradual build of the environmental storytelling of going in through a place, exploring, seeing like cobwebs everywhere, and then eventually being exposed to these giant 50s style atomic monster spiders. And that is really what I think this era of Resident Evil games, which when I see people talk about Resident Evil, they kind of get forgotten because people talk about Resident Evil 4 and how the series shifted after that. But here, again, you get a lot of that slow burn world building where it's a lot more detective work. The horror comes not from being besieged by an army of scary monsters, but by kind of gradually learning about the monsters monsters in this world around you that you can't immediately see in front of you.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the spider thing actually happens in all of the 90s Resident Evil games, but I will say the one in 3 is probably my favorite. I think that's the one at the clock tower, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And by the way, fun fact, the clock tower, which is maybe my favorite segment from the original Resident Evil 3, guess what? They completely skip it in the Resident Evil 3 remake. I'm not joking.
What?
Yeah, you get to walk into the tower and then Nemesis like fucking attacks you and then it completely skips it. Completely skips that whole segment. They honestly, I think they probably cut, I would say, at least about half the game. If I were to hazard a guess, maybe about 2/3 of the original game. It is a terrible remake. It was very clearly slapped together to make a quick buck, and it's one of the few Resident Evil things that I think is legitimately half-assed because, you know, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, but the Resident Evil games are generally pretty involved, like very high effort, but the Resident Evil 3 remake is just bad. It's just bad. It's low effort. And I'm not going to say it's horrible. Like, there's certainly parts of it I like, but it's by far the worst modern Resident Evil game. Like, not even a fucking question. Not one that's like made for like, you know, those Resident Evil Umbrella Corps or, you know, some other stuff like that that's kind of just low effort bullshit that wasn't actually made by Capcom. But like this, oh boy, terrible. Just absolutely fucking terrible. And then, so once again, there's more intrigue. You get the UBCS going on. And then at the very end of the game, there's one scenario where you actually get two different choices, where you get two endings. I was wrong earlier. I totally forgot. So this game actually does have two endings, but once again, they're basically the same. And you can either choose to take one route where you get one person saving you, or you get just the one where you and Carlos make it through the end of the game. Now, the one that's interesting is, I can't remember which route it is, but one of the routes you take, you actually get Barry from the first game to come and save you, which is cool, just seeing him again, because you kind of assume that he either died. Depending on which scenario you play in the first Resident Evil game, he does die. But in this game, you get to see him live, and he gets to fly away, and it's like, oh my god, Barry's back.
A little bit of payoff, yeah.
Exactly, because, you know, and we totally forgot to talk about, the thing about Nemesis is that Nemesis is a bioweapon, once again, made by Umbrella, whose sole purpose is to kill members of STARS. Like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, he does kill other people, he does attack other zombies.
He wields a rocket launcher at one point.
Yeah, he has a rocket launcher, exactly. Like, and, you know, he does kill other creatures and other people, but, like, his main target is STARS. Like, he will stop at nothing to kill members of STARS who are in Raccoon City. So that's why he's attacking Jill. That's why he kills Brad. That's why if he knew fucking Barry was around, or if he knew Chris was around, he'd be chasing after them too. Like, that is the whole point of Nemesis. But either way, the end of the game, you kill Nemesis in one of the best, like, campy, like, fucking character killing a bad guy lines, where Jill shoots at him with a fucking revolver and says, you know, you want stars? I'll give you stars, and then shoots at him 5 times and he finally dies. Great campy video game line, absolutely.
Yeah, that is like a great, like, 90s action movie. That's like Arnold or like Bruce Willis would say that.
No, absolutely. And another one, in the Resident Evil 3 remake, they put that line probably about 25% through the game, and you can actually get that line clipped out if Nemesis punches you. So it's like, it's another terrible rendition of that line. It's crazy. Although I will say the voice actress in Resident Evil 3 does a very good job, but man, just that game is so fucking lacking. But either way, so yeah, those are the general stories and gameplay elements of the first 2 Resident Evil games. Now, this is a series that I think we will expound upon in the future, especially talk about Resident Evil 4 and some of the other Resident Evil games like Resident Evil in the 2000s and stuff like that. But at this point, that is all the 90s Resident Evil games, just those 3. So, Brian, do you have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables here?
Yeah, so we've made pretty clear, Taylor and I both been lifelong horror fans. We both played these at pretty formative ages. I think if you were to play these for the first time now, I understand that they would not have the same impact. It's kind of like when you talk about a really influential band. It's kind of like if I tried to show you the Ramones for the first time and you'd heard a million hardcore bands after, or a million other punk bands, right? You would be like, well, what's the big deal? But there were no other games with not just horror games, but the type of survival horror with this kind of structure, with this kind of methodology, and this exploration, and kind of this detective element, and this weird pacing. At least there weren't popular games that were well known. There wasn't a lot else like this. And when you play it now, there's a whole huge genre of survival horror. There's tons of variations on it. But at the core of it, and I gotta go back to Resident Evil 2 here, I do think what you're playing in most of those games, probably still now, is in a lot of ways the skeleton of Resident Evil 2. And that's still probably, I bet that's still the best example just of the genre, of what it is. Again, I would say either Resident Evil 2 or Silent Hill 2, which are 2 very different games. They probably remain, just from what I've seen of recent survival horror games, kind of like, not the pinnacle. Of course, everything changes with time and no accounting for taste. As far as the skeleton of the genre, you see it here really full formed. And I think even just first 3 Resident Evil games, you get kind of the essence of what that genre is. So if you like survival horror video games, if you like contemporary horror, you might not feel the same. You might not dig the Resident Evil games the same way. If you're younger, you play them for the first time now. But they are like the basis for all of that. And even the basis, I would say, for a lot of the zombie movies that came out in the 2000s. That was the zombie trend thing that actually got a little tedious and overkill. But I would say that a lot of those films, a lot of those TV shows that came out, they take as much from the first 3 Resident Evil games as they do from, like Romero or something.
Well, I'm sure, Brian, talk about the George Romero connection. I'm sure you're more than aware of that there was a Resident Evil 2 commercial actually directed by George Romero.
You've told me this, actually. This is a piece of Taylor lore that I was exposed to.
That's the thing. I mean, maybe one day we'll get into the Resident Evil movies because, fun fact, a Reconciler cast member was in the Resident Evil 2 movie, Resident Evil Apocalypse.
That's probably the most interesting thing about those films to me, to be honest.
I mean, the first one's tolerable, but the rest are rough. Outside of obviously seeing Frank Chiserin from The Reconciler in Resident Evil 2 Apocalypse. Yeah, those movies are pretty dog shit after that, gonna be honest.
For a long time, the problem, and still I would say with video game adaptation films, is that they just looked like, they're trying to look like video games in some way. I don't know why filmmakers felt the need to do that, but it's terrible.
Yeah, not fucking great. But either way, so my final thoughts on the Resident Evil, 90s classic games is, I agree with you. It's kind of like the Founder effect, or like the Silent Hill, or I'm sorry, not Silent Hill, the Seinfeld effect, basically, right? Where something really pioneered something that a lot of things do nowadays, and they're like, what's the big deal, I guess? I don't know, it's kind of cool. But you just really got to look at it from the lens of this was a truly revolutionary style of gaming, a truly revolutionary style of game design, a just incredibly influential thing that basically influenced even beyond survival horror, once again, right? There are so many games that came in its stead that took the world building and the story building in ways that made other games that you may or may not love today. A lot of, once again, the action adventure games were directly influenced by the Resident Evil games. The way that
Max Payne
100%. And once again, we're talking about Resident Evil 4, which once again we'll get into a future episode, but that also influenced action games for well after a decade after this. You know what I mean? There's so many things that these classic games, even though they may seem antiquated now, but there is a quality about them that a lot of game designers to this day try to create these sort of nostalgia bait games, which some of them I like, but a lot of them I don't, because it's that was a time and a place that you just really can't recreate, to be honest with you. But either way, I think all 3 of these games are absolutely worth playing. And interestingly enough, Brian, very recently, you can now buy the original Resident Evil 90s trilogy on GOG, which is a game site I think I bought a few games on in the past, although I don't think I have them now. But I believe you can buy the whole trilogy for only $30, which is really cool. And they come with a lot of quality of life improvements. You can now play with a regular
awesome
controller with them and stuff. And they have full, keyboard and mouse support and fully upgraded graphics and stuff like that. It's just really cool way to play these games. And that was a fairly recent development, maybe last year or two. But either way, and I also have all these games. I was going to have the DS version, and I also have the 2 rarest ports of both RE3 and RE2, which is the GameCube port, which is a very expensive way to play those games. The Code Veronica version is one of the most rare GameCube games. That game's worth a couple $100.
I don't think I was aware that there was an RE3 port for the GameCube. I don't even think I knew that.
Yeah, it was part of the original Capcom 5, which was something that happened in the early 2000s. And it was oh shit, now we have exclusivity with Nintendo. Let's just release all the fucking Resident Evil games on Nintendo. So that's how that happened. But I believe the Resident Evil 2, no, I think it was Code Veronica only had 20,000 copies made, which is why it's very expensive and rare today. But yeah, once again, these are great games to play. Absolutely would recommend it. And especially if you're very burned by the RE3 remake, which I still very much am, definitely play the original RE3 because you will see why people still love that game to this day, straight up. But yes, so with all our Resident Evil talk out of the way, which once again, we'll talk about future games on a future episode. But either way, let's get into our pluggables, talking about things that are not evil and are not currently in this residence. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, you can follow us and subscribe to us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we're uploading every episode simultaneously in both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scotch Run Robert are creating a fantastic series. We just had them on for an episode maybe about a month ago as of recording. They're really cool guys. They need both our moral and financial support to continue to get their series off the ground, even though it's already basically on the precipice of existing, but they're in the last stages of post-production. So either way, they are not only, even without all their funds already here, they are already making this a reality. So at this point, you should support them now more than ever.
Yeah, if you're on the fence about if you want to donate, go listen to our latest interview with Sean, Scott, and Robert, because really insightful, really cool guys. I think that'll give you an idea. Because, if you're a listener of the show, you might be thinking, like, I don't know, if it's a Christian show, like something, is it going to reflect my values? Is that a thing I want to donate to? But I think if you listen to them talk about it at length in our discussion with it, that'll give you a lot more kind of an idea of why we're so invested in helping these guys out. Because again, we spend so much time talking about how there's no middle class for the arts anymore, and there's no kind of like independent art that's, it's hard to find your audience, and you used to be able to do that. We complain about that all the time. So we've got a group of people here who are trying to make a cool, ambitious series, and they seem like good guys and good people, and they're coming from a good place. And for me, the big thing is they're trying to do something really ambitious independently, and that's what I want to support. And I think if you're a listener of the show and you kind of think about movies and media the way we do, give that interview a listen. I'm going to keep plugging it, and that might push you towards wanting to donate if you're on the fence or you're unsure about it.
No, absolutely. And as always with our show, you donate to the campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment. We will, within good reason, match those funds about $20-25 because we want Scott Sean Roberts' dreams to become even more of a reality than they already are. And, speaking of other people whose dreams want to become a reality, we were just, of course, talking about Luigi earlier, who is now cellmates with fucking Nicolas Maduro. Just crazy timeline. Just crazy timeline. But either way, of course, he is currently facing the barrel of 3 different jurisdictions, both, federal and New York and Pennsylvania state. Of course, Luigi is innocent of all charges, just frankly like Nicolas Maduro is innocent of the things he is being accused of. But either way, talk about people who are just as innocent as Nicolas Maduro, which is once again a wild thing to say. But either way, Luigi is just as innocent as him. He's fighting the good fight. He's still fighting the fruit of the poison tree evidence that was gotten at the Pennsylvania Altoona arrest. I think that's still unfortunately going to be an argument that's going to be just litigated literally for quite a while. But either way, we need to morally and financially support him to the best of our abilities. He's got more support than almost anybody who's ever faced similar charges to him. So he's already got that moral support on his side. But either way, just support him in any way you can, whether it's financial, whether it's moral. Send him a letter, as we always say. Talk about him good online. Or at the very least, if you have something negative to say, frankly, just don't say it at all because we don't need that shit. But either way, I don't think any of our subscribers or followers would have really anything that negative to say about Luigi at this point. But if you do, I don't want to fucking hear it. Nobody wants to hear that shit. Just straight up.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, we say it every episode. He's not guilty beyond reasonable doubt. The reason they are pushing this through is because they're mad. They're mad at the solidarity. They thought they could pluck out a random guy, pin this very extreme case on him, and then close the book. They thought they were going to lock him up forever. They thought they'd be able to kill him. They're now mad at the solidarity that we have shown us just as normal people for another normal person, just a normal working class person who's being railroaded and pinned with a bullshit charge. And so now they're even more committed to fucking doing what they will with it because they see the solidarity we have for him. So not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, if they can do this to him, they can do it to you. They have nothing on him.
Exactly. If they can do this to Luigi, they can do this to, once again, a leader of a foreign country who might even literally be a cellmate of fucking Luigi at this point. That's how fucking wild this timeline is, right? They can do that to fucking anybody. So that's why you cannot listen to the propaganda. That's why you can't listen to whatever random Gusano dissident in Miami or Madrid are talking shit about whoever. You have to just get beyond the propaganda, people. Luigi is once again innocent. Once again, if this trial were to be held today with the current evidence, there would be no trial, no impartial jury that would ever convict Luigi. So that's why we need to support him. And just like with the Lucifer and the Father campaign and crowdfund, just if you donate to him, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment. We will, within good reason, once again about $20-25, match those donations because we believe in Luigi and Nicolas Maduro's innocence, to be very clear once again, especially on those particular bullshit charges. And, speaking of people who are being railroaded and who should be world leaders who are respected, we have a Patreon. So please subscribe to our Patreon today. Become our very first patron. We have many incredible tiers, including the $5 tier, which is one we've pretty much always been talking about, which is the one where you get every episode 48 hours early. You get 2 to 4 episodes a month, which is an insane deal. If you wanted to talk to your normie coworkers about why the Gusano fucking scum are lying about Venezuela and Maduro, and on top of it, why Resident Evil 3 is inarguably the best Resident Evil game, you could hear those takes 48 hours before fucking anybody else, because the first 48 hours is most important.
How applying the lessons of the first 3 Resident Evil games can help you to understand the geopolitical situation happening in Venezuela right now. That's the most important part.
Absolutely. ACAB to everybody except for stars. No, I'm kidding. But either way, ACAB
includes stars.
Yeah, ACAB includes stars, exactly. Nemesis was real Antifa. Oh, God. But yes, either way, absolutely. Support our show. Support us by becoming a patron of ours today. We want you on our fucking cruise. Seriously. And then, Brian, do you have any pluggables as well?
Yeah, as always, please follow the podcast at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. That remains the best way. If you would like to harass me, if you'd like to make a suggestion, if you have an idea for a cringe generational segment to send us, please urge you. If you're going to send me cringe material, do not send me a picture of myself. But yeah, if you want to harass me, if you want to do a Gamergate campaign against the podcast, the best way is at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram. You can also follow me privately at JLoBiafra on Instagram and Threads. Probably still on Twitter. I don't remember my name. I haven't been on Twitter basically since the Elon takeover. It's pretty unusable. You can also follow us at the Facebook page, Millennials Are Old. Now, I have some fun news about that, which is, typically I use that to watch, the Billy Jack boomer communities. But lately, what I've been doing on it, and I haven't done anything content-wise, I just kind of browsing, is I follow various millennial and boomer kind of leaning far-left Facebook meme groups. I haven't done anything content-wise with this yet, but I want to share it with some of you guys next week. The difference in how some of the extremely online boomer communists post versus the extremely online millennial communists post, because it's very funny.
That honestly sounds fucking incredible, and I can't wait to hear it, like straight up. That is going to be fucking fantastic. But you know what? Speaking of things that are also fantastic, Brian, I'm going to be falling asleep in my residence very soon, and my nemesis will not be my bed. I will not be a tyrant in my own bed. I will fall asleep very carefully. I won't need to take any sort of pharmaceuticals. I won't, be infected by a virus and wake up sick as shit and being itchy and tasty. I'm just going to sleep like a good cooked millennial soy boy will. Right, Brian?
I am going to make dinner, and then before bed, I think I'm going to watch the Boondocks, and I'm going to be a very quiet, good boy, and my neighbors are going to call me a resident good.
Absolutely. So with all that out of the way, have a good night, everybody, and we're going to have a fantastic episode for you next time, including whatever Brian found about boomer communists. I am so fucking excited to hear about it. That sounds hilarious.